So today I'm going to value an Elizabethan work on armory. It's actually two books bound in one. The first is Gerald Lee's Sedans of Armory, printed in 1568. And the second is John Burroughs' Works of Armory, printed in 1572. Now, one of the things I love about books on armory or the making of arms during the Elizabethan period is that this was a time when Elizabethans were really making their presence known on the world stage, whether it was through increased commerce as merchants or through the navy. And people wanted symbols of status and honor, but it was no longer just reserved for noblemen and aristocrats. So you could have been a merchant, you could have been part of the gentry, or you could have been somebody who made a significant contribution to society, and you would want the royal herald to bestow upon you a handsome arms for identification for your family as well as future generations. This was one of the most popular texts of the period. Now, from a modern perspective, something else I love about it is just the symbolism and the iconography. It's just filled with wonderful animals, shields of birds and lions and boars and ostriches and peacocks and crowns, and you name it, it's in here. And it's just extremely enjoyable to look through at the delightful woodcuts of the period. Lovely knight and chivalry and funny fish. So how do I value a book like this? Well, as I've said in previous videos, one of the first things you do is do a physical inspection of the book. Now, it would be wonderful to have an Elizabethan book bound in its original binding. Usually that's a calf binding of the period. This is bound in a later binding, marbled boards, and the spine is quite worn, and it was probably bound in the 19th century, the mid-19th century. You can also see that because the paste downs, which is pasted down to the front board, or the first blank, is made of a different paper which contrasts to the paper in the rest of the book, both in tone and quality. The second thing we want to look at is completeness. For a book of this period, one of the references I like to use is ESTC, the English Short Titled Catalog, which has a fine database online of early printed English books. And if you click through there, you can get page counts, or what we call the collation of a book. The book is not complete. Ooh, it's missing the title page and at least several pages of the preface to volume 1, as well as the last few leaves of volume 2. So in terms of value, immediately that can sometimes be a near fatal condition flaw for an antiquarian bookseller. With that said, it does have that redeeming quality of these wonderful woodcut illustrations throughout, which certainly still appeal to people. Now, if I go on a site like Rare Book Hub, it is a title that pops up at auction with some frequency. And there have been copies, some have been hand-colored, sometimes you see both volumes, even though they were printed separately, bound together in one volume like this. And the auction records would indicate that the book would probably get somewhere in the range of $600 to $800. Now, that sounds like a rather meager sum for a work of such beauty, actually from the 1500s. It shows you what you can buy in the antiquarian world, which is why it's well worth collecting. With that said, one of the things that's very important to do is to look through the pages for any annotations, any handwriting, something that can enhance the value of the book, especially if you're a bookseller and you want to sell it to an institution or a private collector. You have to put your energies into creating a description and marketing it and making some value-added proposition there. One of the fabulous things about this book, which I did not know until after I bought it, is that on page 109 there is a poem in an early hand. It may not be contemporary to the 1500s when the book was printed, but it's certainly from experience the first part of the 17th century. And it says here, Villiers is gone, alas, 'tis quickly said, and quickly spoken too, Villiers is dead. So the question is, who was Villiers? Well, Villiers was George Villiers. He was the first Duke of Buckingham. He was a courtier, a favorite of James I, King James I, and purportedly he was a lover of the king. And there's a lot of rather salacious letters that evidently survive between the two. With that said, he was considered rather inept, a poor legislator, and the parliament twice tried to get rid of him. They tried to impeach him, but the king stepped in and saved him. But he was so vilified among the general public that in 1628, John Felton, who was a former army officer, wanted to seek revenge from being passed up for some promotion in a previous military campaign, and he assassinated him. So this might be an original poem shortly after that assassination that's referring to Villiers. Now, there was a lot of poetry that sprung up from this dramatic assassination at a pub during the period, and a lot of it was pro-Felton. They depicted him as a hero and strong and virtuous for getting rid of this inept voice in the king's ear. This particular poem seems to be a little more sympathetic to George Villiers. So it's quite interesting in that regard. It also has some very nice lines in it. It says, "Thus nobles are but men, and they must die. Thus worthies are but earth." And I read it wrong. "Nobles are but men, and die they must, and worthies are but earth and gilded dust." And one of the other things that's interesting about it is that these depictions of the period often, discussed Villiers and his effeminacy, of the way he dressed. And you get a sense of that here too, where they're referring to Villiers' fame. It says, "Thus Villiers' fame perfumed." And it also refers to his powdered tears for oils. Now, I searched many texts online through Google Books and through some other sources to see if this was a copy of a printed contemporary poem, but it seems to be an original poem, or likely an original poem of the period. So I believe that is certainly something that can substantially increase the value of this particular copy if I were to sell it to an institution or a private collector. How much would it increase? Well, that is a little bit of the art of being a bookseller. But I believe I could write up a nice description, place it in its historical context, and probably market this in the $1,500 to $2,000 range. So even though that this is an incomplete copy of a book that is not particularly rare for the Elizabethan period, the fact that it has some additional added manuscript poem really enhances it. And that's why I encourage people, when you buy old books, to certainly look through the book carefully for any signatures, any handwriting, study them, and see if you can draw out something that is more interesting for that particular copy than just the book itself. So that is my valuation for an Elizabethan book of Armory, and I hope you will tune in again for some fun things about the world of antiquarian books, as well as some secrets of the trade and tips on how to research and value things. So thank you so much.